I'm not going to introduce the whole panel at the same time. I think the best thing we can do is to everybody's going to speak for 3 or 4 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation. So what I'm going to do is I am going to start with David Brewer, who's the Network Delivery and Development Director of Highways England. He started 2 years ago as Network Delivery and Development Director. He's responsible for maintenance improvement of the network. He's previously held senior roles at BAA and was Development Director for Gatwick Airport. Prior to joining Highways England, he was Chief Executive of Lend-Lease, AMEC joint venture, responsible for major waste management PFI business. And we're going to hear from him now about the whole idea of maintenance and asset management. This session is sponsored by Costain, and what we want to explore in this session is new thinking on maintenance and asset management that will be essential to delivering the government's very high expectations. So let's start with David.
Hello everyone, nice to be here amongst friends, lots of familiar faces in the audience. I've got about 3 minutes. Keep trying to persuade my wife that 3 minutes is longer than she thinks it is. Should be plenty of time to cover my material. Where do I point this to make it move to the next one? How do we move the slides on? Okay, so I think we've got some maintenance and asset management professionals sat here. Probably the core skill that we have as an industry is juggling. And I think we are constantly trying to juggle the customer service and utility we get from our assets, because that's what they exist for, the long-term value for money through the life cycle, and the cash which is available to do what we need to do. I think there are probably 3 key things that we need, or 3 key challenges to being able to achieve that, which were up on the screen a moment ago. And those 3 are having good knowledge about the assets, having forward funding certainty so that you can do future planning, and being able to optimize the interventions that you make around the life cycle value for money equation. I just wanted to share where I think we're at with a couple of those. In terms of knowledge, most of you will be aware that we are in the East Midlands as an organisation changing our contract model with a clear intent that we as an organisation take greater ownership of knowledge about the asset and asset performance, which I think is a step in the right direction. Clearly, the new structure for Highways England gives us a level of funding certainty rolling forward, which again enables us to start forward planning. And by January next year, I expect to be seeing 5-year asset management plans for each of my regions. And clearly, we want to push out the time window from that so that we get longer and longer forward certainty of what we're going to be doing. And then one area where I was kind of concerned, I guess, was around the ability to optimize life cycle costs. And I was concerned about the way in which the new pseudo-regulatory framework was set up for our organisation, about whether there would be a real focus on short-term cost that potentially was in tension with our ability to drive asset value for money over the life cycle. I'm really pleased to say that the way we've agreed the framework with ORR is actually we're going to be measuring efficiencies across these 3 areas of economy, productivity and effectiveness. I know Scott later is going to be talking about one of the things we've done around the productivity side of things, but the one I wanted to draw out was effectiveness, which is measuring efficiencies where those efficiencies might be spending a little bit more money up front to do a better job so that you get longer asset life at the end of it. So rather than making short-term interventions at lowest cost, actually optimizing the investment. Now, we obviously are always playing in that field against pressures of affordability. That's a fact of life that we all have to deal with. But fundamentally, the structure is good. The structure is conducive to us making the right choices. And one of the big areas where we've declared a desire to deliver efficiencies, or a commitment to deliver efficiencies, is in pavement resurfacing. We have committed to deliver 500 odd million pounds of efficiencies over the 5-year road investment strategy period. And we're basically breaking that down. We've got a great team working on this now, drawn from across our supply sector and our own team in the organisation. And we're looking at each stage of the asset life and finding areas where we can deliver efficiencies, and in particular, those efficiencies that are about extending asset life. So, you know, I think making some interesting progress in a few key areas that allow us to do our job better. I'll be interested to see what questions you've got around those afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, my God, there's a woman in the panel. There's some mistake. We're delighted to have Dana Skelly, Director of Asset Management and Surface Transport at Transport for London. Dana is a Director of Asset Management. She's a Chartered Civil Engineer with an MBA and 26 years contribution to the highways and transportation sector. Her role, her raison d'etre, is to inspire people, stakeholders and partners through continuous improvement and change. So let's see how she's doing it at Transport for London.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I'd start with a bit of a challenge as to whether we could be more efficient in the world of asset management if we transcend our traditional supply service boundaries. Let me try and explain what I mean. So just to set the context, if you think about it, transport assets, the world of transport asset management and its delivery arrangements tend to be most frequently shaped by our organisational responsibilities and our geographies. So this actually influences how you as the industry respond to our needs. You kind of form your response to what we think our needs are. And it means we don't always perhaps realise the opportunities outside of our own boundaries, for example with our delivery contracts. And I would suggest that one size does not fit all, and that there should be a whole range of delivery approaches considered. Assets, activities, service and area bases, and what we should include are various combinations of these. As I say, suppliers tend to define their structure and capabilities to align with how we let our contracts. Let me just talk to you a little bit about TfL. Our assets are varied. They range from a cable car, which you can see, to underground tunnels, to trees, to the Docklands Light Railway, to road infrastructure. And in Transport for London, we have got ourselves to a place where we have common asset policies and strategies across all of those assets. We've got common asset management training for all of our staff. That's not just asset managers, but all of our staff on what asset management and its principles are. And we're looking to join up across common areas, across all of that asset life cycle in terms of, for example, bridge inspections, all sorts of areas, project management, engineering, where we can be more efficient, but also create for our staff better opportunities in terms of career paths and opportunities. For our customers, well, aren't they the most important people? Our customer promises that every journey matters, and our asset management vision is to have safe, reliable, and cared for assets which are designed for London's future. These are very customer-centric statements, and yet, as far as our customers are concerned, they want to see this integrated, connective, reliable system supporting movement and growth and making life in London better. And yet we set ourselves up in a way that we're separating the very skills and capabilities into different sectors in terms of rail, underground, highways, and so on. Now, the industry is already moving away from kind of minimum standards to a more risk-based approach. Has the time come for us to start thinking with the delivery world more about an outcome-based approach based on that move towards a risk-based approach? If we started from scratch with infrastructure asset management, how would we structure it? Certainly our graduates arrive in our organisation wanting to apply their engineering skills and knowledge to make a difference to our customers. They don't want to be pigeonholed into certain areas, and they don't want to be sort of put in stovepipes of potential staff development. So if asset management is about optimal intervention and whole life cycle costing, with a BIM world in the future, we'll be much better equipped, surely, to have a kind of holistic asset information world across all of our infrastructure. And maybe we should be thinking ahead now and managing our asset management in that way from a customer, from a capability, and from a data and information perspective. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lee. Now we have a man who loves lean thinking, Scott Cooper, who is the Highway Services Director for the Kier Group, who's one of the sponsors of today's event. He's responsible for the service performance of the 4 Kier Highway England asset support contracts, which operate highway maintenance services on the strategic road network. He's also responsible for the delivery of Kier's lean strategy and the implementation of continual improvement. Scott Cooper, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about how can we deliver more for less, and you'll have all heard that, and it was nice to be introduced as a lean expert, and I'm certainly not. And we set ourselves a challenge during this year. We had a site visit. Colin Matthews came out onto the M42. It was a site that we planned, a resurfacing project, and when he came out, it sort of dawned on all of us really how much time we actually spend mending the road. And I'll often, my little son will say to his mum, he said, "What does Daddy do for a living?" And we'll say, "Daddy mends the roads." And he'd say, "What, in a suit?" And but when you actually analyse how much time we were paving out there, it was 33% of the working window. And so all the work we do is within live traffic, adjacent to live traffic, so we have to mobilise traffic management to do that. But I think we've come through a culture of being concerned about what time we get on the network and what time we get off. And so what we discovered by analysing that was we've got far too much risk allowance in that programme. And what we managed to do was sort of push those boundaries and deliver more work within that arrangement. And what we also found was a lot of cultures within the organisation that really only want to do what they've always done, so we need to move on from that. And so we looked a bit further at that. So all of our work, we have to go out and close a lane. So Kier have 4 of the areas. So when I went to look at the traffic management interventions that we do to deliver those services, I was amazed to discover that in one calendar year, we go out 48,000 times to do all different aspects of maintenance, inspection, repair. And we have about 27% of the strategic road network. So approximately a third. So you can times that up and realise to deliver the outcomes that we have to deliver, we're out there 150,000 times, putting out cones. We've done some great things in the industry, and Jim talked today about priority number 1 is safety. And we have managed to remove carriageway crossings, bizarrely on a backdrop of going out there 150,000 times. When you then look at how much of the time we've used whilst we were out there against the working window, it's about 60% of the time. So when you talk about lean, you talk about waste, and you talk about making a difference. I think it's quite clear to see that if we could program and schedule our works in a much more efficient way, we could remove an awful lot of those interventions. And what does that mean? Approximately, that's about £100 million worth of traffic management across the country that we do. And if we could do it at 60%, we would save £40 million. Moreover, we would deliver the same outcomes with less exposure to our workforce. And unfortunately, we live in an industry by which some of the people who have worked for different companies haven't gone home, and they have been killed putting out that traffic management. So I think my challenge to the audience really is how can we think differently in the next 5 years and deliver the same outcomes that we have to.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, in a change to our published programme, we're going to hear from Malcolm Sims, who's Director of the Asphalt Industry Alliance. He's standing in for Alan McKenzie, the Chairman of the Asphalt Industry Alliance. It's a division of the Mineral Products Association, and together with Eurobitumen UK, they're the Asphalt Industry Alliance. He's involved in everything asphalt related that passes through the association and represents the MPA and the UK on various British and European standards committees. So Malcolm Sims, thank you very much for standing in.
Thank you, Kirsty, and welcome everybody. This slide presentation was written for my chairman, who can't be with us. There we go. But this slide has changed. Come on. There we go. Right. So these are kind of his words in my voice, so bear with me on this. Over the last few years, we as the AIA have shouted long and hard about the need for longer-term funding commitments from central government to allow local authorities to adopt an invest-to-save strategy for road maintenance. The government's previously announced pledges for 28 billion of investment in road infrastructure up to 2021 are a positive note, clearly, and would start to address years of underfunding in our road network. But when it comes to local roads, all too often their importance is overlooked. We've yet to review the full impacts of today's autumn statement and spending review, but I expect that, sadly, the funding disparity that will exist between the amounts allocated for the strategic network and local roads will remain. It was noted this morning that the HE network represents 2% of roads and carries 30% of all traffic, which apparently makes a compelling case for billions of pounds worth of investment. On the other side of that coin, local roads carry 2/3 of all traffic and make up 90% of our network. However, only 21% of the government's funding pledges before today have been earmarked to improve the condition of local roads. In fact, the Local Government Association estimates in the next 6 years local roads would receive only £31,000 per mile of funding in comparison to 1.4 million per mile on the strategic road network. Obviously, there are different networks with different demands, but it's still a huge gap between the two. The imbalance means that local authorities will go on struggling when it comes to tackling the backlog of repairs. And those are just some of the sort of headlines that we get through the alarm survey, highlighting what local authority engineers tell us about the state of their network. This year's survey highlighted that the annual level of shortfall between what highways engineers need to maintain the roads properly and what they actually receive remains at just over £3.2 million per authority, and £12 billion overall is needed to bring local roads networks up to scratch. That data comes from frontline local authority highway engineers informed by implementation of their asset management plans. And in some cases, I believe that local authority asset management plans are several steps ahead of what we currently have for the strategic road network. They've been forced to deliver these over recent years, and they seem to be making good inroads. If nothing else, they understand the value of their asset. So I'm sure I will agree as the discussion goes on with the fellow panelists that innovation, skills, optimization, efficiency, collaboration, all good buzzwords. They all play their part when it comes to local roads as well as the strategic network. But the starting point has to be a fairer and more certain allocation of funds, whatever the amount will be after today's spending review. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just to let you know, the panel is having a struggle to hear what's going on here, but I think in the conversation that follows, we'll try and get that sorted out. Now we're delighted to have David Tarrant here as the Managing Director of Transportation at Mott MacDonald, who is sponsoring this extraordinary theatre. He's Managing Director of Mott's Highway Business, responsible for leading and managing the consultancy's broad range of activities in the UK and abroad. He has got over 30 years under his belt in the sector with senior roles in both public and private sector organisations. He's also a former president of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation. David Tarrant, please.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Kirsty, and good afternoon, everybody. As has just been said, many of you know I've had a career in the public sector, working as a client and indeed with the politicians on trying to deal with a lot of these issues, and have then moved looking at it from the consultancy side. And I have to say, no matter which end of the telescope you look through, the issues are really very much the same. So the key issues that come out are around safety, funding availability, funding certainty, value for money, road user experience. We hear about taps being turned on, taps being turned off, who does what, and what commercial and contractual model is the best. And I think, to be honest, we're all, as clients and providers alike, really grappling with all of these issues. So what I thought I'd do today is just perhaps pick out 3 issues which sort of transcend some of those things to prompt some debate. And I think they cover the highway sector as a whole rather than thinking about any particular client. So the first one I'd pick out is innovation. Again, the first thing to say is I think there's a lot of really good things going on out there, but I would question as to whether we're doing it in a really purposeful way. So what about, are we making the best use of information and technology, the whole concept of big data to manage our assets? And what is our culture as an industry like? It seems to me that very often time and pressure forces us to keep doing things in the same way rather than do things differently, as Scott was urging us to do earlier on. And what step change do we actually see in materials and technologies happening? And if you think what's happened in the aircraft industry in the last 30 years, there's been a significant change. And are we really seeing that step change with ourselves? So to emphasize, I think lots of good things, but how do we up our game? And I guess that brings me on to risk and uncertainty. So are the issues I've just been talking about actually inhibiting us in innovating? And is it actually the environment in which we're operating, be it contractual, financial, cultural? And are those things, I say, actually inhibiting us from seeing how we might improve? And I guess looking at the wider risk issues, I mean, asset management is really all about making decisions based on risk. So knowing how an asset will perform and how it is performing is actually key to our decision making. So being able to measure that performance, have up-to-date knowledge, and see how we can improve and reduce risk is absolutely key. And I think that's an area that bears further examination for us. Which actually brings me on to time. Seems to me, again, that highways asset management, and it's no great surprise, has been traditionally subject to significant change. So we've had short-term funding horizons, changing funding availability, changing priorities, and very often politically driven. Certainly if one works in local authorities, you see that happening all the time. So how can we devise a system which actually gets that political buy-in? So to incentivize that long-term approach, provides demonstrable value for money, and reduces uncertainty. And I'm not after nirvana here, but reduces some of that uncertainty. And also providing some consistency across the network. And I think this chimes with Dana's point in that I dread to think how many different contracts and different contract requirements there are across our country in terms of highway maintenance. And that's actually thinking about it from the customer point of view, let alone the suppliers. So it seems to me there's lots of questions for clients and suppliers alike for the whole industry to ponder. But I do see it against a backdrop where I see infrastructure and its importance actually in a much better place as far as the UK is concerned now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Bob Collis is going to be talking about putting the customer first in asset management. He's the Director of Infrastructure at TRL and responsible for the TRL's research and consultancy work for the government and private sector customers both in the UK and overseas. He's a member of the World Road Association's UK Executive Committee and Executive Director of the Forum for European National Highway Research Labs. He's the concept lead for the development of the Forever Open Road and Forever Open Railway programmes. Bob Collis, finally.
Thank you, Kirsty. I'm going to pick up on that, as we said earlier, the customer. And we heard this morning very much about customers in terms of ORR's role, Transport Focus's role, and Highways England starting to really think about what their customer wants, what their customer feels. And I've just put up there, first slide, it came up quicker than I thought, the others were slower, but it came up. Look at all that lovely kit TRL developed some of that, others developed some of that. Many of you in this room will know what each of those pieces of equipment does. It helps manage the asset. Beautiful pieces of equipment, engineers love them, technicians crawl all over them. They provide the data that goes into making the decisions on how to maintain our roads. When are we going to spend money, how much are we going to spend, and so on. And I'm not going to name any of the names, but there are quite a few wonderful machines. And one of my colleagues actually used to, I think, drive some of those. So where does the customer fit in that? Well, there are customers sat in the cabs, but there's not a lot of customers in that picture. So we really got to think. We can't throw this away, it's really valuable. But in managing our asset, we do genuinely have to pick up some of these innovations we're hearing about. So for example, we heard about this morning, I think in this session, mobile phones. If a car is to be a computer and connect with other cars, connect with the asset, connect with the operator, then the mobile phone and the computer in the car is key to this. So the vehicles can do this job for us. So in managing our asset, we can bring the customer into the decision making. Not at the end in terms of a survey, do you like the way we've been running your network for you? Why don't we bring them in at the beginning, in the survey and through the data we collect from them. So we can collect data through the car's journey, remembering, I think in the survey that Jim O'Sullivan put up, of the issues customers are most interested in, it's ride quality, it's the surface of the road. And also, I'm just going to add one thing into the frame, so we can use technology, really do it. We can also use social media, and that's not being talked about a huge amount. And the reason I'm saying this is because my wife told me so. And this is where this came from. For about 2 months, we've had a new road scheme near where I live. Lots of people don't like it. I've had questions in my own mind about it. I'm not going to say where it is or anything. She said, there's loads of things on this social website that I use about this road scheme. I said, oh, that's interesting, let's have a look. Not safe, don't like driving it, petrified by it. I said, that's interesting. I wonder if anybody from the Highway Authority is reading that. 2 days later, there's 100 extra comments. This went on for nearly 2 months. Comments after comments after comment on social media. Is anybody reading that? I don't know. However, the other day she said there was a comment from the Highway Authority engineer agreeing that a lot of things that were being said were right. That is a great move forward in asset management. Thank you.
So we've got about 35 minutes to have conversations about who goes first. Is it the client? Is it the customer? Is it the deliverer? And just coming back to Kier, what you were saying is that we had to have new models, and I wonder actually if the client has to, you're talking about innovation, the way you're delivering your asset management, but is the client being as innovative in the way they approach you as you are being in the way you deliver results to them?
We work sort of very well with the clients, so testing, yeah, one. So when we approach...
Can you all, so hang on, can you all hear?
Cool.
I think we should use that as take that as a belt and braces, please.
Yeah. I think the relationship that we've had with Highways England as a provider is one of sort of working in collaboration. So when we sort of achieved the efficiency targets that we were looking to get, we needed to work with Highways England. We need to work with our supply chain, and so it was a collaborative effort. I don't believe any one party would be able to get to that successful outcome on their own.
What's happening though, I mean, if there's going to be this delivery of so much more new roads, so many more new road space, do you have to work out a different kind of relationship? Are there new ways of working?
I think we do have to consider that, and if the funding is going to increase from 3 billion to 5 billion, and we're going to spend it on the same network that we have, and I think we have to really consider how we deliver those works, and not only sort of the larger works, but all of our maintenance interventions. It's a staggering amount of times that we close lanes on the network to do what we need to do, and I think we have to sort of start thinking more along the route. What's best for that route? If we look after a tunnel, You know, we will have scheduled maintenance interventions, and we will only go out at those set times unless it's an emergency. And I think we perhaps need to start looking at the network very differently.
Thank you very much. Just talking to David Tarrant, as your position now as a consultant, that relationship between the client and the provider, you're saying there's going to be 5 years, proper long contracts. There's going to be certainty. But yet, we've got a whole new situation with all this new development in roads. How do you know there's going to be certainty, and how do you know that these 5-year plans will work?
I think I'd start off...
5-year contracts. I mean, it depends. They're not all 5-year contracts, are they?
No.
Short contracts, yeah.
They're not, and I think there would be many in the industry that would say 5 years is far too short for contracts to really look after a piece of infrastructure, and most people would tend to think around a period of 25 to 30 years. I'd come right back and say it's around the political vision and the political desirability of really looking after something that they own. And if they actually, because some of people may not be in a position to commit for that length of time, but if they are able and do want to, then that longer period of commitment and then whatever structure you derive from that is actually what you should be doing. So it comes back to ownership by politicians and the ultimate decision makers and funders as to the way forward.
If you want real innovation, you have to give longer contracts. You have to give better contracts, don't you?
So I think we have some examples. So we are awarding a 15-year contract for maintenance in Area 7. So there are areas where that's appropriate and helpful. I think the most important thing to do firstly is to have clarity over what the work is going to be over that period of time. So the asset management plan, I think there are plenty of options about how you bite that off into chunks of work, but assembling that work sensibly, whether that be combining different bits of work or longer periods of work, is of course part of the picture. We're contracting on many levels, so we have contractual relationships with the likes of the tier 2 aggregate companies, which are also sitting there alongside the contracts with our consultants and immediate contractors, so it's quite a complicated picture.
Malcolm, from your point of view.
Yeah, obviously for our end of the industry, this is the bottom end of the supply chain, it feels like sometimes. All that funding certainty that should be coming forward gives the industry confidence to invest in its delivery plan and capability. We have member companies now investing significant amounts of money in new plant, new equipment, training its workforce up, recruiting, so that we can help deliver the promises that Highways England are making. And we look forward to working with you all.
Bob.
Whilst I welcome the thoughts of the panel so far, longer term contracts, greater certainty, I have a real worry about these. Innovation, yes, we can be innovative, but we've got to make sure we really are. And having done an hour's talk on roads of the future earlier on, if we have too many 25-year contracts and everybody runs the network exactly the same as they did on year one, therefore it never improves, never changes, never keeps up with technology and the needs of the customers, then we've got a problem. So long-term contracts have to enable innovation and change to occur.
Thank you very much. Dana, looking from the point of view of Transport for London, how do you operate your best contracts with your suppliers and your providers of asset management?
Okay, so I guess there's a few considerations here. I mean, one reason why you might want to engage with your supply chain about understanding the optimum length of a contract is to get the best return on investment for their plant and kit, and sort of start working with the supply chain to understand that. the idea of the 25 to 30 year contracts tends, obviously in our experience, to be much more the PFI side. And I would question, bearing in mind we tend to design our assets for a 150-year life, why 25, 30 years? What happens after that that's different? But it's something that we seem to have done in this industry, and I don't have the answer to that. And then just in terms of innovation, I think clients have a huge part to play in enabling and encouraging innovation, and I don't think we do it well enough yet. I recently, engaging with one of our supply chain partners on an annual review, asked them how they thought they'd done in terms of innovation, and their answer was, we haven't quite got to terms yet with your process at TfL in how to, and it's like, no, this isn't about process, you don't need to understand our processes, what can you bring to us? And perhaps we're not setting the questions in the best way, perhaps we're not asking for support with outcomes, perhaps the fact that we're simply asking our traffic signal partners to give us 98.1% availability is just setting the wrong question.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, that's interesting, because you go for long term, you go for short term on behalf of the customers, and you're saying that perhaps the way that you're actually setting out what you want from whoever it is wrong, and actually you're not asking for enough innovation.
Well, I don't know whether it's we're not asking for enough innovation. We certainly seek to engage and get innovation. I don't think we're sort of seeking the question in the right way in terms of saying these are the outcomes we want and encouraging the supply chain to come in. We also have other constraints, don't we? I mean, we've been trying for many years to reduce the requirement of signs to be lit as they are, as isn't the case in Europe. And you look at vehicles with the huge halogen lights that almost blind you, and yet we're still requiring our traffic signs to be lit when the world has moved on. So we do stand in the way sometimes in terms of letting innovation take its
I'm going to grab this from you because I think we've got a shortage. Right.
Thank you very much. Anthony Oliver from Infrastructure Intelligence. The reality is the public sector is still really wedded to CapEx rather than whole life value, rather than TOTEX. Does the panel think there are, I suppose, examples or lessons that can be learnt from, say, the water industry or the energy sector, or even from the privately financed infrastructure examples that the road and highway sector can bring in to really encourage the public sector towards a TOTEX view of the world, a whole life value view of the world?
Oh, God. Okay. Well, let's see. Are these working now?
Anthony, I think I can only agree. As an industry, we have split ourselves into designers, maintainers and operators, and very often there is a passing of the baton at various stages of the project, and very rarely, and you've mentioned a couple of areas where that does happen through DBFOs or on PFI schemes, where somebody does actually look at the whole. And I think that is something that the industry does need very much to change its approach on. You can see it happening, you can see it happening in certain parts. Is it happening enough so that we truly look at it? And then it does then boil down to clients being able to take that long-term view as well, because it may mean spending a little bit more to start with in order to see in terms of that initial capex, in order to see the long-term benefits. But should we be doing more? Absolutely.
Let's use from the customer's point of view.
Was it working? Yes.
Yep.
From the customer's point of view, which is the right solution? If I go around Birmingham one way, I can go on a toll road. I can go on a non-toll road another way. I can go on a DBFO road at various places in England. You will know where I mean, but they don't know it's a DBFO road, but it's a privately operated road. I can cross a bridge on a toll at the M25 or near Bristol over the Severn. We must start to work out which one of these is working. There are lessons to be learnt. So to build that model for the future where CapEx isn't the key thing, it's TOTEX, we need to learn from the different experiments that we've seen to have set up in this country over the last 25, 30 years in terms of paying for roads. And it comes down to paying for roads in the end. So therefore, there's a lot of work to be done before we can get anywhere close to changing the model we've got. But we've got to start that journey soon and understand what's best for us and what's best for our customers. Thank you.
Yep.
No, I totally agree. And as a customer, and we all drive around, and we hear a lot of debate today whether it's a local road, strategic road, what contract it is. But as a customer, what you do is drive on a road. And you want to get from where you're going where you're going to. And so I think that's what the customer sees.
But it's interesting because you were saying what the customer actually wants, because on that very simple thing like massive halogen lamps, but yet you've got these huge overhead signs. There are people that are in Nissan Micros that don't have that, and there's people that are in massive Volvo HGVs. If the road is for everybody, you're going to have to stick with what you know.
Just on the question about OPEX and TOTEX, if I can just answer that. I mean, I'm maybe a bit of an idealist, but I kind of think that the OPEX efficiencies fall out of doing the capital investment in the right way. So in the advent of BIM and being able to understand that when you have a site like, let's take Hammersmith Station in central London, you've got 2 bus stations, a tube station, how many PA systems, how many OPEX systems are being managed and maintained and procured in different parts of those stations. So if you do your CapEx right, you'll get your OPEX efficiencies, is my view.
Right, there's a questioner there, please, and then any more hands up? Let's take your question just now.
Hi there, Ben Morris, NTT Data. So I was interested in some of the challenges you were talking about in terms of the political challenges. I don't know if you can hear me very well on the panel, but you're saying that industry wants long-term certainty, but we also have a political reality where politicians' timescales might be different to industry's timescales. So I wonder what some of the solutions might be. I think you've articulated the challenges very well, but I wonder if you've got any idea as to the solutions.
Well, I mean, like a totalitarian state, that kind of thing. Okay, political solutions, highways first.
Yeah, so I guess I think we are starting to break into that. So all of you are aware of the change in status of Highways England from a government agency to a government-owned company. Early doors with that, it will evolve over time. But some of the key principles behind that were to set up an organisation which had a licence, which created duties about optimising long-term value for money, which is what our licence says, and setting us up so that we were just slightly less kind of close to the action in terms of that political decision making. So the politicians will still make the decisions about what they wish to prioritise, but our job becomes influencing those decisions by providing really, really good quantified information about these are the consequences of some of the choices that you might make.
But it's interesting because then what you can say is that actually if you provide all this information saying you're doing a good job and you're a separate company, then you can go out and lobby with the general public against the government if necessary.
Yeah, so I might get told off if I saw our role as lobbying against government, but what we certainly, we've got a customer strategy which says we want customers to feel that we're on their side. And we certainly do believe that part of our role is to represent the customer in the decision making. So we're working really closely with Transport Focus to try and get under the skin of some of those questions about, do you want these signs lit, or would you rather we spent a bit more money on the potholes, or getting involved in that discussion, so that we can represent those views back into government. So arguing with government, not so much, but actually presenting a kind of enabling them to make informed choices, and being an advocate for customer needs, absolutely.
Yes.
I was just going to actually make that point. I think the question really was around the challenge, obviously the challenge around how one deals and gets certainty. And I realise how lucky I was, I think, in having my career in Hampshire, where at the time, certainly, the elected members truly understood the value of it and truly understood the value of asset management. And it was around the advocacy of making sure that they continued to understand it, and that required a lot of communication, because when budgets get tight, even though when the politicians go on the knock in advance of an election, highway maintenance and footway maintenance come top of the priority. We all know that education and social care take the priority, and that's absolutely key. But they kept that funding. And why did they do it? Because they saw the value in it. And that required a lot of work to keep that advocacy going. And I think that's our role, is to be doing that.
Forgive me, this is a question born out of ignorance, but if you put a contract out for maintenance and it's delivered faster, and as we were hearing this morning, if you put a contract out for a new roundabout and it's delivered faster, do you build in increased profit? I mean, what happens? Is there enough of that incentivization, do you think?
It's a mechanism by which if we come up with an efficiency saving that can be shared between going back to the client and to ourselves, and then we reinvest that efficiency.
Yeah. And is that standard?
Generally, yes, standard across the contract.
Yeah. Should there be more of that, do you think? For example, in London, you were saying that you've been quite sluggish innovation from some of your asset companies, maintenance companies. Do you think there should be more of that in response to innovation?
I certainly think an approach where the benefits are shared between the supplier and the client is a good approach, but from my point, it's getting the innovations in the first place. That's the mechanism, after the event almost. It's how do we open that up? Is money a shared gain enough incentive? I would challenge back.
From the customer's point of view again?
My view on this is about can you hear me okay? Picking up on what was said earlier on and moving across to what else do we need from this. This is professionalism. Our industry needs to put professional cases, professional advice forward at a very high level. And I think David's example is where the politicians appreciate and understand why and how the professionals have come up with the decisions or the advice that they have, then that adversarial problem starts to disappear. And then the rewards don't just have to be financial. There can be pride for a start, and there can be IP that could be gained as well if they want, some companies want to gain even more out of what they've done from their innovation. So again, there's lots to explore here.
Malcolm. Can you hear? No? Okay, put Malcolm's mic up, please. Oh, I'll just give him this.
Yeah, I was just saying that clients and the public both need to appreciate the risk-reward basis of innovation. Historically, the risk of innovation came back to the provider of it. Yeah. A more even share of that in appreciation of the potential rewards. Clearly, if the innovation doesn't deliver, there's a discussion to be had. But when it does deliver, let's look at rewarding those that deliver it.
What about that from your point of view as Highways England? What about that?
Yeah, so I completely agree with the way Dana framed this earlier, which is the client's got to be really actively involved in that process of innovation. So we create the atmosphere, we create the environment. If we take the work that Scott was talking about on working windows, we've picked that up and we are now going through a process at looking at every single part of our network and saying, what's an extended working window that we believe we can use more constructively. So that's being rolled out. We are conscious in that process that there is a slight increase in the risk that works will overrun and impact the customer. Yeah. We've said to these guys, we're prepared to take that risk because we think it's worth the trade-off overall, and that's not going to come back and bite you. But there are still, I think, too many areas where our contracts are very transactional and seek to just shove that risk unrealistically across. And as we work over time, we will be doing a lot less of that, so a lot less risk transfer through to, artificially to contractors.
Right, we have a questioner right at the back, please.
It's Jonathan Mosley from Ernst & Young. I was just wondering, is there an opportunity for the road sector to learn a little bit from the way Ofgem has applied the RIO framework to distribution network regulation, where one of the I's in RIO stands for innovation? So progress and innovation is hardwired into regulatory settlements. Can any of those principles flow through to the way Highways England is regulated and how it manages its supply chain? And the second question I had is whether the roads...
Can we just do that one first? Because
sure.
I just want to... it's absolutely not your fault. Who heard that enough to answer it straight away? No? Okay. Can you repeat that question? Or come down, perhaps even to stand up, something to the microphone, just... Eat it.
So Ofgem has applied a new regulatory framework called RIO, R-I-I-O, to the regulation of distribution networks. And one of the principles of RIO is that the regulatory settlement, the financial settlement, is dependent on the achievement of progress in innovation. So that is one of the I's in innovation in RIO. So my question is, can that principle be applied in any way in the road sector?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, right. Hi.
There are a few critical differences, one of them being that we are still directly funded by government rather than any other sort of funding mechanism, and we're spending taxpayers' money, not kind of our shareholders' money. So some of those kind of frameworks are slightly different. I think the guys from ORR are pretty enlightened in terms of their approach around regulation. So Peter Antlick comes from the water sector, I think brings some of the good practice from there. If there is work that we can go and do fishing around in some other regulated sectors, then we'll go and have a good long hard look at it. And I'm not particularly familiar with the power distribution one, but it sounds like one to go and have a look at.
Take a further look at that. Dana.
I'm not familiar with the model that's been described here. It's about utilities, was it? I couldn't hear the question. Could you perhaps...
Yeah, so if I play back what I think the question was about, I think the suggestion was that in Ofgem's model for power distribution has innovation as one of the factors which is rewarded and played through then into the financial
settlement. The same should be on the roads.
And could you transfer that to roads?
I think you answered the question in terms of the different setups, but I do think you also answered the question earlier in terms of the culture that we have in our different industries, in terms of where we are in maturity of that open culture to enable innovation to take place. I mean, we seem to be better in TfL, perhaps shouldn't say this, at getting our own staff to come up with innovative ideas than we are getting our supply chain partners to come up with. I don't know what that means about it.
So my experience on the innovation bit is that actually our supply chain are really good at responding to what we ask them for.
That's right.
And if we ask them for the right things, then the right thing sort of comes along. And if we accept a level here, then that's where it sticks.
David.
I was just going to pick up the issue around the water sector, because that's another part of our business which does operate there. And we've certainly seen, again, significant gains through the exact mechanism that was described, but it does require, again, a different contractual model. So I don't want to get into that, but it's much more about alliancing and much more about ownership and sharing of ideas and the risk and reward. And I think that sort of model is something, again, to have a look at, because I think certainly it's been successful in the water sector.
Yes, another question from the front here. We can take the microphone down here.
Thanks. On the basis you can probably hear me down the front. There's not been much mention at all of data analytics, and the use of data and technology to actually try to, I suppose, take asset management in highways to a new place. It's been done in water, it's been done in lots of other sectors, but we haven't really, do you think we've really embraced it? How do we get to the real, the revolution of data, the use of data in asset management in highways?
Bob Collis.
Thank you. I think we are well advanced in that revolution, actually. You may not think it, but there is, and the reason I say that is because we collect an enormous amount of data, but we don't do the right things with it. A lot of it is just forgotten, lost, put on the shelf, and a lot of it is abused as well. The data's there, so we run in this country regular surveys of all of our road network, trunk road and local authorities, yearly in most cases, if not several years in gaps, so they're all measured. We measure our bridges, we measure our tunnels, we measure our lights, we measure our signs for reflectivity and our lines for reflectivity, but we don't always use it in the right way. So in terms of managing our asset, we sort of know what we've got. We don't quite know how good it is. Some areas are better than others. But also, I think, having said that we've got a lot of data, we need to collect a lot more. And I mentioned customer views. We need more on environmental impact, and we need more on carbon, climate change impact, and biodiversity. So there's an enormous amount to do to get this right.
Malcolm.
I think one of the other challenges in big data is translating big data into big information, because we can gather as much data as we like, and as Bob said, if we don't use it, then it is virtually meaningless.
What have you done, Malcolm?
I've just had a heart attack. So
Somebody's pacemaker's obviously gone off.
I can turn my phone off and everything. Yeah, so it's getting away from focusing on data and look at the information and the knowledge that that provides to inform as well.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think what we're going to do, because I think we've taken a lot of questions, I think you've been incredibly patient and incredibly good about this. We have got a keynote address at 20 to 4, which we're delighted to be doing outside over at the other one. So what I'm going to do is thank our panel, give them such a round of applause for being so good at dealing with this.